Hello again, everybody. We are back on Gelvin Valley for Farming Simulator 15. We are in the middle of planting, so we'll continue that here. And I have the wrong crop on. I think I want to do some canola, so I don't have to pick up bales in here. Last video I got a little bit long, trying to keep these to half an hour, and I think because I was blabbing on about fires and such, I ended up getting almost 40 minutes, so try to do a little better than that. When I do these episodes, I have this timer that's running beside me, and I forgot to turn the silly thing on, the last one, so I had to kind of guess. And obviously I didn't guess quite right. But in the last episode, I don't know that I ever asked the question I wanted to. Maybe I did. Just don't recall. Oops, I don't recall. I was talking about all these fires because I had looked at some videos on YouTube and of house fires and whatnot, and it just stirred up some memories that I had of fires growing up and whatnot, and some of my own mistakes, I guess I would say, handling fires. Just being a kid or having some misdirected curiosity, and I just thought of something else and I did, and I almost hesitate to say it. But hey, what can I say? I tagged all these videos as not being appropriate for kids, right? And we're not talking about bad words or anything like that. It's just maybe things that wouldn't be advisable for a kid, or not just kids, for any of us to do. But let me get to my question. Question is what experiences have you had with fire, and are you somebody who's ever had your home burned down? To where you've had to go through some unfortunate event like that, and um, probably a pretty traumatic too. And or are you a business person? Did you have a warehouse burn or whatever? I mean, Oh, that reminds me of another story, even when I think of business. But anyway, I'm just curious if you have any stories of your encounters with fire, even as I share some of mine. But yeah, in our community, probably, I would say 2.5 miles away from our home, a little further out in the country, there's kind of a small industrial area, if you will. I have no idea how they ever got zoning. Maybe it's because it's close to a railroad track, although the railroad is defunct. I don't think any trains have come through there in decades. But maybe that's how the zoning happened. Well, there's this place over there that does work on campers and RVs. And over the years, I think I recalled at least 3, if not 4 times that it literally burned to the ground. Matter of fact, I think they're due to be burned to the ground again. Even as I say that, I realize how crass that sounds. Um, but I remember wondering, even as a kid, it's like, did the owner himself, after this happened a time or two, did the owner himself start his own building on fire because he wanted to build a new one and he figured he would just collect the insurance money? And who knows? I mean, I know there's people out there that do that. Like I say, it happened at least 3 and I think even 4 times where the thing literally burned to the ground. There was nothing there but carbon and ash and a mess. And there was always money to rebuild, so they must have figured it was an accident or not intended, not arson, whatever. But I've always kind of wondered about that. But like I say, it's been a few years, so I wonder if they are. I shouldn't even talk that way. Um, just one of those things you wonder sometimes about certain of your neighbors. So I'm sure people listening here have some colorful neighbors too. But one other story I remember that I did that, as I look back in repeat these, I'm ashamed to even admit them. But I mean, they're true. I mean, I I'm a human being like anybody else. I'm not perfect, and I didn't do things perfect back then, and I still don't. And I did some really stupid stuff. And this one here, my mother caught me. Um, we a lot of times growing up, we would clean around the place, branches of trees and bushes and what have you. We would accumulate them out on a pile, out in the pasture typically, that when it was fall and all these branches and whatnot had dried out, and usually the fall rains would come, or they would be on the way. That's typically when we would burn this pile. And I mean, pretty much did it every year. Sometimes, it would happen in the spring before summer hit and all the grass dried and what have you. But I had seen my dad pour stuff on the fire. And what I don't think I realized is he was pouring diesel on the fire to help him get it started or whatever a time or two. Well, I remember one time when we were sent out to get the burn pile going or whatever. I mean, it sometimes was a pain in the neck. If it had rained, before and there was a brief window of opportunity to try to, get the pile going or whatever, it could be kind of hard to get the thing lit. So I mean, we would typically be out there with matches and newspaper or whatever trying to get this silly fire going. But it's like, oh yeah, well, Dad poured something on it. So I went and got the gas can and took it out there, and I think I put it on this. I had a little can of it, and so I poured it in this can, and then we had a small flame, I think, and I chucked it in, and I was just really, really lucky. I don't remember fire streaking out. I mean, sometimes when you do that, I mean, the fire can follow the fuel, and it can come right up into your hands, and, burn the stuffing out and burn your face off. Well, fortunately, that didn't happen. But my mom saw it happen, and she came unglued and came running out of the house, yelling like a wild woman. Um, Obviously for our safety, because she didn't want me to hurt myself. And yeah, I think I got in quite a bit of trouble over that with Dad. But but yeah, I mean, fortunately, nothing happened bad. But that was a horrible example to set, for my younger siblings who would have watched what I was doing. And fortunately, I think all of them saw what happened to me, and then it really upset Mom and Dad. So I think that they learned from my bad behavior. That wasn't the only bad behavior they learned from, unfortunately. Car coming this way. Don't often meet him at this hill. Sorry, I'm kind of driving erratically. I'm reaching for my drink here. Alright, we'll sleep. Oh my goodness, I gotta remember I have the damage mod on here. I know I turned the settings down, but I still can... Where am I in my damage? Not too bad. Just 6%. Now, yeah, I'll put rape in here too. Sure, why not? We got another little field over there. And I think the rape gets sold... Where is it? Yeah, Gelvin Bio Oil. So this field's a good one to put into rape. I'll maybe do 22 into rape also, since it's so close to a sell point. And I think that's the best sell point for canola. But house fires, building fires of any kind, field burns, trash barrels burned by the piles, whatever, that's one thing. Probably the real types of burns that would give me nightmares. I mean, they really didn't, but I do remember as a kid having some fears over this, would be the forest fires. You know, a lot of us here in America, we all know who Smokey Bear is. You know, grow up with him. Only you can prevent forest fires. You know, and I remember going on a fishing trip with my dad and my siblings, and this is way out in the sticks. And it wasn't paved getting there. We went over some rough road, but someone had dragged a movie projector clear into this place, and there was a ranger that gave a forest fire presentation, showed us a movie, and of course, in the movie, and we're all sitting out there surrounded by fir trees and other flammable material. While he's showing us this movie, he's showing us footage of other forest fires that happened, what they look like, and how terrifying it is. And I just remember being scared. And I think one of the things I remember asking my dad was, I think I was sitting in the pickup with him. I said, "Dad, you know, why did God invent fire? You know, if it's so dangerous." And he answered me real patiently. I don't remember him laughing at my questions, but I remember him saying, "Well, you know, if it wasn't for fire, you know, we couldn't drive the pickup here, you know, with the, you know, with what goes on in the engine or whatever. It's just a gas pickup or what have you." But yeah, I mean, it's to a kid, you take that seriously, and you know that particular place we went, it was called Olali Lake, way up in the mountains. Um, I think it's still pretty remote. It's hard to get to. You beat up your vehicle going in. Haven't been there in quite a while. Um, but how could I have known at that point, years and years later, I may be several decades, that there would be a forest fire that would come through, not quite where we saw that movie, but on the other side of the lake, away from where they had kind of a rudimentary lodge. It just scorched the whole hill. To this day, when you go there, I don't think the I don't think the bad wood or the burnt wood, you know, sometimes they can salvage log it. Maybe it was far enough out that air was too hard to get to. There might have been environmental regulations that prohibited them from doing so. But you go out there and it's almost ghostly. You just look at it and there's just all these sticks, spires of trees standing up in the air. I mean, the whole hill kind of resembles a porcupine. You know, just looking at, and I say hill, I mean it's a mountain. It goes up thousands of feet, you know, beyond the, not quite up to the alpine level, if you will, you know, where there's, or above the tree line. But, you know, it just looks wasted. And, and it just drives home a point as to the damage fire can do when it's out of control and nobody's around to stop it. You know, there's a lot of, like up in our mountains, the Cascade Mountains in Oregon here, you know, there'll be periodically in the summer even. I think up in the mountains, a lot of times the weather doesn't pay any attention to what season it is or what it's supposed to be doing. They can have thunderstorms and rain, and we'll be blistering hot and dry down in the valley. But yeah, a lot of times, I mean, obviously it dries out like everything else up there. There's still snow cover in some places, but not all. That's only on the tallest peaks. So it's pretty dry, and if a rainstorm comes through, I know it seems counterintuitive, but a lightning can strike, start a tree on fire, and it's just kind of, that's just the kinds of things that happen all summer long, and you just hope you don't have a really bad summer where this happens in a more populated area to where there's significant damage. And I gotta say, I know I've mentioned a number of times on here, I don't mean to be political, but this may kind of sound like it. And what do I know? I'm not a forester. I'm going off of what other people who I presume know what they're talking about do. But I have seen the politics of our state here. And and you know, everybody likes seeing trees. And it's worthy of preservation. You know, nobody wants, back in the day when they logged the state, some of those timber companies literally raped the land. They would take all these beautiful, majestic trees that have been growing there for hundreds of years, saw them down, turn them into timber. I got no problem with that. But then they would just leave the stump. Nobody would replant, and they would just leave the landscape denuded of forest. And eventually, I think laws were put in place that if you take the tree, you gotta replant multiple trees. And I think we've wised up on a lot of that, to where now, as I understand it, I think there's even more forest in Oregon in our state than has ever been there in its history, including back in the timber heyday back in the 1800s, whenever it was, when they were coming in and getting the big trees. We don't have as many large trees anymore, but we have more timber as a general rule because there's been so much replanting and it's much better managed. It's better, but only in part, because the same folks who are highly interested in not cutting trees, I mean, and that's part of it. They really would prefer that the timber companies don't harvest anything. Just plant trees, keep trees, watch them grow, but don't use them, which I personally think is ridiculous. I mean, we need wood. It's a wonderful renewable resource. You take a tree, you cut it down, plant another one, it grows up. I mean, you can't hardly get better material than wood, in terms of a renewable resource. It doesn't run out. You can always make more. But like I say, there's a class of people that really don't like anything done in the forest. And I know California is kind of the same way down there, to the point where, if you look at a map of the national forest and the forests of Oregon, you'll see all kinds of roads out there, and they do some maintenance. But I think part of the reason for that is for people to go in and do maintenance on our forests. And what is maintenance? Well, it's maybe getting rid of some undergrowth, if it's briars or brush, maybe mowing some of that until the trees are tall enough so that they can kind of take it over. Uh, Maybe it's smaller trees that are non-native and you want to clean them out, get them out of there. Who knows what it is, but it's maintenance. Maybe even trimming some trees, maybe cutting some of them down and part of doing this is maintaining and taking care of your natural resource. I think there's some folks who believe it should just be entirely left alone, and that anything man or woman would do just somehow taints it. And I don't think it's that way at all. I mean, I think working in nature, we can really help in terms of how we manage it for productivity and for preventing things. It's kind of like putting in a dam. There's variants like, oh, will you stop a river up and fish from moving? And yeah, some of that happens, but there's other benefits that help people. Maybe a dam helps flood prevention down in the lower valleys, and there would be much devastation with all the rain we get in the winter. It's just kind of the same concept, but there's a class of people that they would just assume we had no dams either. But maybe some of these folks have never had catastrophe strike them in their life. I don't know, um, where they get that perspective. But in my mind, nothing wrong with cutting down a tree and using it, and as long as you plant more and you take good care of it. But as a result, as I understand it in our state, there's more folks who would rather just leave things alone. That as a result, our state has not done much maintenance, or as much maintenance as it could or should have, up in the national forest or state forest, whatever they're called up there. So, so much so that this, I guess you could call it deferred maintenance over the years. Let me have my blinkers on, shouldn't I now? Deferred maintenance, where there's out of control undergrowth, Maybe there's older trees that have died and fallen over, and instead of going in and pulling them out or using them for some productive purpose, they've been left there to rot. Only in the meantime, they're kind of a fire hazard. And so then when these storms hit in the summer, which they happen every year, um, well, now all of a sudden you have a whole lot more burnable, combustible material for the forest fire to ignite. And maybe if better maintenance was done, there'd be more fires that would fizzle out because there'd be less undergrowth, um, that kind of thing. There's always going to be some fires, but I think some preventative maintenance, would be helpful. But I mean, the politics kind of have to be right in order to have it happen. And sometimes you wonder, does it take the right person's house to be burned down by a natural catastrophe before everybody wakes up and says, "Oh, we got a problem here, and we need to try to work on it." And then maybe there are some other ideas that we could consider versus just not doing something that, well, anyway, I made the point. So, actually, maybe I can go in here. Then I can get going on the field. I'm going to do this one rape also. I think it's been 3 years ago now. When was it? Fall of 19? I think it was 19, unless it was 20. I almost think it was the year that COVID really hit bad. Was that 20? I kind of think in 19, COVID came to the U.S. It really didn't become a massive problem until early 2020, I think. So all year long, of course, like everybody on the planet, we were trying to deal with that. And then in the fall, we had another catastrophe that I hope I don't see again in my lifetime, because it was just apocalyptic, um, where all the right conditions happened for a major forest fire that was not close to my home. Usually when forest fires happen, it seems like they're way off in the Cascade Range somewhere or out on the Oregon Coast Range. You hear bits and pieces every now and again of some fire that's, taken over a certain number of 1,000 acres. California has tons of them all the time. I think their management practices are as poor as Oregon's, which is why they have, trouble with fires too. Um, but that particular fall, I think I have footage of it somewhere. I say footage of it. What it is when the fires happen is what it did to the atmosphere around here. I mean, it literally turned the sky red, and it's almost like, well, where's the fire at? And it was, several days to clear all that out, to where the sky just darkened in the middle of the day on account of these fires, and you couldn't really see where they were. Unless you knew where to look online. There was some, I think, satellite data that would look down and see where these fires were. I don't know what started them. I think that particular summer, it was a combination of natural fire starts as well as, unfortunately, some arson. Or just flat out horrible, terrible ignorance. I heard one story. This was up by, I think, Multnomah Falls. That's on the northern edge of the state, along the Columbia River. There was some kids that were hiking up in that area. A number of people were hiking up in there, but these kids were bozos. And I think they had some fireworks with them. Middle of the summer, everything's tinder dry. And one of the dopes, lights up a firecracker and just throws it down in the brush. And then didn't go retrieve it, didn't do anything, it's just like, ha, ha, ha. And there were some other people that saw them do this. It's like, kid, do you not know you're taking your life in your hands, let alone the lives of everybody else that may be on these trails out here, and you don't know that that's going to go out. Well, apparently, a major fire started up there. And this is around, I almost think that's a national park up there by Multnomah Falls. I can't remember for sure. But, I mean, it burned areas in parks that should never be burned. They're intended for the public. So it just destroyed things that are a benefit to a lot of people in the state, a lot of people to come visit. I can't remember if there were people that lost their lives, that group of teens. I think they were hauled into court eventually. Someone told on them. They figured out who it was or saw them do it, chewed them out. I mean, almost got in some altercation up there, and then was trying to get people off of the mountain. I mean, lives endangered, property burnt, as the fire. I don't remember how big the fire was up in that area. But what do you do? What should society do with the kid who does that? You know, and when it's a kid, when it's someone underage, there are limits by law as to how much you do. Oh, their brain isn't fully formed until they're 25 or whatever. But when someone does something like that of such damage, there may be jail time. A lot of these, they get hauled into jail. There's a public uproar, wanting their head, if you will. And then they get in the court system and the lawyers duke it out. Maybe they go do a little bit of time, maybe not. But it never seems, they never pay for the damages, for their at the least stupid behavior. If it's with malicious intent, I mean, that makes it even worse. They've tended to burn all this and put people in harm's way. Although a lot of times I think some of that a kid just doesn't think. But still, you would think you'd be smart enough not to do that. But, who am I to talk? I just got done telling everybody of some of the stupid things I've done. And so, maybe given the right circumstances, that kid would have been me. And I'd sit there, duh, and I'm not a criminal, I didn't intend for all this to happen. Maybe it was a situation like that, so maybe I need to have a little more compassion. But, I'm just thankful I didn't have any property up there or loved ones whose lives were endangered, to go through something like that. I think a lot of times what happens is, there is some jail time, there's a fine that's nowhere near covers the damages, of course, but it's something they can afford and that hopefully hurts. And then there's maybe a certain number of hours of community service they gotta do, emptying trash cans, cleaning toilets, whatever, in the state parks. But I saw a suggestion one time that I thought sounded pretty good, is that there be none of that, no fines, no nothing, but that they require the public service of these people that do this to serve as a smoke jumper. Our state has a lot of folks who do that either as a career or as a volunteer. They fight wildfires. Every summer they happen, and I'm glad there's people who are willing to deal with it. And I know it isn't just our state, it's others too. And oftentimes, if a state is having a particularly bad time, there will be some, if we're having a hard time, there'll be people from other states that come and help. Our people here will go to other states. But to drive home a point, with these kids who just callously do this, maybe some of the public service needs to be to serve as a smoke jumper. All right, you put your life in harm's way, and you see what that feels like, and you interact with the people whose lives are destroyed by these wildfires, and maybe it'll help you think before you attempt to do that again. Well, like I say, who am I to talk? That could have just as easily been me, and I'm just fortunate that nothing bad happened with some of the silly things that I've done when it comes to fire. But I talked about the one up north, we had multiple massive fires, hundreds of thousands of acres burned. And we particularly had two of them that were really bad in the Santiam Canyon, which is east of my home. And what was really freakish was this particular time, and I don't know what started these two fires, but the winds blew from the east. And it rarely does a wind blow from the east. Usually the prevailing winds in the summer are from the north, and then kind of in the evening you'll get some winds kind of coming from the west. The ocean is not even 100 miles to the west of us. So kind of towards the end of the day, I think you get a sea breeze that comes in sometimes in the evening. So usually it's north and west, and um, it just hardly ever. And in the winter, of course, prevailing winds would come from the south. We get a lot of storms out of the south, occasionally from the north, if it's a cold one, um, but hardly ever from the east. Well, so these fires started in the mountains or whatever, and then they blew down the mountain, and they took out several communities, little towns, burned them to the ground, almost all the structures in the town, and then just kept coming west. And we were in, well, let's see, no, my brother was in an evacuation zone. He's a little farther east, he and his family, where they live, to where uh, if they were called, they would have to leave at a moment's notice to get out of fire danger. So there was like a zone close to the fire where it was immediate evacuation if you lived there, because the danger was immediate. Um, and then there was kind of the waiting zone, if you will. That's kind of where my brother was, to where you better pack your stuff up, because if you call, you need to leave immediately. You have to. And so you better have your stuff together to take with you, otherwise you can't take it. Well, I was in zone 3, one removed from the app. I was close to the line, to where we just were monitoring the situation. I think the fire line, as near as I could tell, maybe came within 10 to 12 miles of our home, something like that, as the crow flies. And I would like to think that, wow, for that fire to get clear to my home, well, first off, 10 to 12 miles away is kind of the tree line, if you will, where you go from valley and farming activity to mountains and trees. So, it's one thing for a wildfire to go through a bunch of trees. There's all sorts of things that are to burn. But once it gets out into farming country, there's a lot of open fields. And yeah, maybe some of those fields have grass in them that's dry and could burn. But there's a lot of fields too that are just bare dirt, or they got something else going on and it's green. And so it isn't going to burn as easily as the being up in the forest would. So I would like to think that before it ever would have touched my home, it would have to come through all of that. And in other words, I would think virtually impossible, but I don't know. I never would have thought this particular event, would have been possible either. And it was kind of just surreal, trying to work and looking out the window and seeing it just get darker and darker and darker, as the smoke clouds just kept billowing overhead and blotting out the sun. You could not see the sun at all. I know sometimes people have seen smoke and there's the red ball up in the air, that's the sun. Well, this totally blotted it out. And the whole sky was just this apocalyptic red, a little bit of orange. It started kind of yellowish earlier in the day, just really freaky. And I know my son was working that summer, and his boss had some bees. He works for a beekeeper. He had some bees stored further out in the country, and they knew of these fires, so they went out there to retrieve them. Well, the further east you went, the closer you got to these fires, and the worse it looked. And I remember him sending me some pictures back, and just like, wow. I hope my son makes it home. But fortunately, it never hit our home. I know it hit lots of other people. Some lost everything that they had. It's just really tragic. And And they're still cleaning up the mess. Up in the Santiam Canyon, it's had a number of fires over the years. I remember as a kid, going up through there and just full of lush green trees, and it's never going to be the same in my lifetime. There's a river up in the canyon, and there's a good area of the river you couldn't even see because the trees and the foliage was so thick, and this fire came through and it just wiped it clean. And now you almost feel kind of nervous driving up through there because you can see more. It's like, my goodness, I didn't know the road dropped off right over here. It's like, how many times have I driven fast around that corner? And it's like, if you mess up, you'd be in the river and you wouldn't even know it. Well, now you can see all that, and so it's just going to take a long time for regrowth to happen, but eventually it will. But kind of like I started saying, a lot of it is mismanagement of the forest, I believe. And what instead you'll hear a lot of times in the news media, it's climate change, it's global warming, it's all these things. And I don't know, I'm not a scientist. I realize the climate operates in cycles over time. Um, but, but no, I don't think that's what it is. Um, I think any of us, if we had some catastrophe around us that happened because of neglect, for example, if we have a car and we know the brakes are out, but yet we do nothing to fix it, well, then it shouldn't be any surprise if the next time when we drive down the road, we crash into something because the brakes don't work. Everybody would say, hey, that's your neglect. You should have fixed the brakes, and then you could have avoided, the accident or catastrophe. I think there's some truth to that, and by analogy to the forest and the whatever plan they have for working them or maintaining them or lack thereof. So I'll get off my high horse. What do I know? All I know is it was just interesting times to see all that, and like I say, I hope I never have to live through that to where I lose a home or have to go through that. But there was a lot of neighbors that went through that out in the um, forest area where they lived. I know some people from our church kind of lived a little further out. I think most of them were okay. I don't recall anybody having their homes destroyed. And then there's stories of, well, basically heroism. I have some cousins that own an excavation company. I won't say their name. But when an emergency happens, these are some men's men. Let me just put it that way. When bad stuff happens, they run toward it, not away from it. And so I know one of my cousins that works for this company, the area near his home and his neighbors, there was pockets of all these fires all over the place. Well, he got in a bulldozer, and I don't think they could pry him out of the thing. He was in there more than 24 hours. And he went around the area where he lived trying to contain a fire, basically single-handedly. He went through fences, he went on people's property, he did not ask permission or nothing. His focus was to put out the fire while everybody ran away. And I realize whenever there's multiple emergencies, the firemen service and all the people that you count on to come help, that work for the government or whatever, they're going to be stretched really, really thin. But I mean, there was some areas, I heard some other stories. I have other cousins that were kind of up in the area that would take supplies and things up there, wanting to help the firemen. They even took water up there to them to try to just give them materials. And I remember one of them coming home just exasperated. He said there were several firemen up there sitting on their backsides. They weren't allowed to fight the fire that was right in front of them because it wasn't in their district. And you hear stuff like that, and it's just maddening. Bureaucracy that slows things down to where additional damage happens. And I think that's kind of where my other cousin, what's the old adage? It's better to ask forgiveness than to ask for permission. where he just, kind of, as they say, took the bull by the horns and just went for it, and he got the job done. And then they went back and looked at all the things he had damaged to do it. But I think by the same token, he had saved a lot of homes, a lot of property, and I don't know about lives particularly, but it's just amazing to see people rise to the occasion. When an emergency happens, and put themselves out there just to help other people. My goodness, this is on 40 minutes. I'm sorry. Um, I think I'll call the episode there, and I'll get off my fire kick. This is Gelvin Valley. Thanks for watching, for coming around, and I'll let you all go from now for now. We'll see you again the next time.